Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We are on the precipice of training camp with the rookies reporting on Wednesday of this week, the 17th. The veterans come in on the 24th. We're doing a couple of preview shows for training camp. And this is the second of our two shows. We're looking at the defense today. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, a lot to talk about here, especially, you and I, before we hit record, just jumped straight into, and we're like, wait, we need to have this conversation on the air. But yeah, the middle linebacker situation is very interesting. And as we preview this, it's going to be the position, I think, on the defense that I'm going to be watching the closest, because there's a lot of questions, and a lot of talent, at the top three guys. But is any of that going to be healthy enough / ready to actually contribute? So that's it's going to be a very interesting battle during camp.
The Seahawks made a philosophical change, I think, in the offseason. They redirected money, which we'd been asking for a long time. Now we're going to see how that works in practice. They shifted the money away from the linebacker and safety positions and gave that money up front and a high draft pick in the trenches. And then we got some guys at those other spots, safety and linebacker, and we're going to see how it all integrates and works together. And we're going to get to all that. I just want to remind everybody kind of where we came from a little bit. So, we hired Mike McDonald in the offseason, and we had Leslie Frazier come in as a assistant head coach, but he really is going to work with the defensive line and secondary with this team primarily. And Arden Durde from Dallas. And he's kind of a placeholder defensive coordinator in name only. He's not going to be calling the plays on Sundays, but he'll be right in there as well. And he's also got some terrific experience coaching defensive line stuff. But the Seahawks ranked 25th in the NFL last year in points allowed. The optimistic side of the whole thing is that Mike McDonald's defense with the Ravens was first in points allowed in the NFL. And it only really took him a couple of years to get a defense that was somewhat middling to a highest performing defense in the NFL. And so that's the hope with Seattle, is that they can go from 25th just on scheme alone. We've already got most of the players coming back, and get that into the teens somewhere, and then make another big jump in 2025. They were 31st in third down conversions against them. For example, Seattle allowed 380 first downs. Our own offense only picked up 317. We were supposed to have one of the best offenses in the league. I think we ended up ranked 12th in that category. So literally it was a kind of absurd. A lot of rushing yards, 4.6 yards per carry, ranked 27th in the NFL. Defense gave up 4,260 yards passing, ranked 21st in the NFL. They did have a pretty decent stat getting to the quarterback, 47 sacks last year. That ranked 12th, but really mostly bottom third of the NFL overall. And so we're trying to improve upon that. And we're here to talk about it.
The thing that surprised me looking through the stats was that there was a team that was worse than Seattle at stopping the run.
Didn't feel like
31st and not 32nd. I'm like, how was Arizona that much worse? And yet they were.
Huh. I did not know that. Yeah, that's interesting to me.
But yeah, and in total yards per game, Seattle was 29th. So yeah, this defense was really bad. And now we've got a completely different scheme. A lot of similar guys, but also a lot of changeover, because right up the middle linebacker and safety, is all new. Everyone is gone and all new people. And let's just start at middle linebacker because that's kind of the biggest of the big.
Sure.
The top three guys from last year, which were Wagner, Brooks, and Bush,
Yes.
are all gone. Replaced by Baker, Dotson, and a rookie, Tyrese Knight.
Essentially, yes, absolutely.
And so, top three guys out, next three guys in. Now, Bush was not good at any point in the season. He struggled to make tackles, was supposed to be good in coverage, but kind of struggled to do that. Wagner was Bobby Wagner. So he's awesome against the run, but his lack of speed and diminished, physical abilities there really hurt Seattle in coverage. And Brooks was Brooks. He's a guy that comes downhill and makes a lot of tackles, but also isn't great in coverage. Even though he's got the speed to be significantly better at that than he is. But as a guy that gives you two guys that are good at stopping the run, but yet this is one of the worst run defenses in the league, 31st. And none of them were good in coverage. And so there was a need to make some changes. The NFL today, you've got to be able to cover. And it's a passing league. And the Seahawks had no guys on the team that covered well at the position. So they went and they made that change, and they got guys that, one guy who can cover really well, and two guys that they're a lot like Brooks. They've got the physical talents to do it. Now we're going to see if they actually show up and are upgrades at that. And we'll see.
And we're hoping a little bit of the scheme change and the coaching is a big, is a big change as well that you can kind of add to the mix, because I do think, Jerome Baker is okay at everything, really. Drops back in coverage well, moves up into the box, is a good tackler, solid tackler, great blitzer, in certain situations, and kind of, gets sideline to sideline. And he's kind of a jack of all trades kind of a guy.
He's a real good player, but is he healthy?
And nobody knows.
No.
Yet. We will find out soon. We'll get status updates, because if he's on the field, he's on the field. If he's not, we're going to find out.
Yep.
And so we'll know shortly about Jerome Baker. And that's going to be really important. I think this is kind of an underrated. Maybe we're making we're overemphasizing this position based on the scheme, and we can talk about that in a minute. But Jerome Baker is going to be wearing the green dot. He's going to be lining guys up, making plays. He's got all the experience, 7 years in the NFL. He's been doing it at a pretty decent level. He's got paid this year.
Mm-hmm. Kind of.
Well, $7 million, fully guaranteed, basically.
But it's still a 1-year deal.
Yeah, and it's less than like the Miami Dolphins, who he came from, gave to Jordan Brooks. Brooks ended up signing an $11 million deal. So
they give Brooks a lot, and longer term, where the Seahawks got it was cheaper, and they got a more well-rounded player. The difference is if Baker had been healthy, fully healthy, he would have gotten a Jordan Brooks deal.
And I think Jordan Brooks, if they would have acted sooner, according to John Schneider, Jordan Brooks would have been a Seahawk. So that'll be interesting to watch that a little bit. So I think they wanted Brooks back. He just wasn't the priority that Leonard Williams was. According to John Schneider, that was one of his regrets of the offseason. He admitted that. And then you've got Terrell Dodson. And we've talked about him before in our kind of position group focused shows a few weeks back. But following the injury there in Buffalo to Matt Milano, Dodson saw his role significantly increased in 2023. So prior to that, he had a total of 68 tackles and some other stats in 4 years.
A lot of special teams play.
Or in 3 years prior.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. A special teams guy, kind of a third, fourth option on the roster as far as linebacker, similar to a Radigan or a Patrick O'Connell, for example, on our roster. And And so this guy was kind of hanging around, took an opportunity, had an opportunity because of injuries to kind of come in and affect the defense. And he did. He had a great statistical performance last year, while still lacking, a few traits that you want to have in your starters, like the physicality and the athleticism and so forth. He made up for it. He did the job.
He's got great speed. And that's one of the things that attracted the Seahawks to him was his, the Seahawks lacked speed at linebacker last year. And so Dodson's a guy that really moves. He has great speed sideline to sideline. And so that was one of the things. The defense should be faster this year, in part because they went and got him. Now, the inexperience, he's only got 10 games as a starter. The small sample size, all of that. There is some concern there. And I think you've actually got
scheme too.
Yeah, you've got some additional concerns, going into this than I do, because I see it as a situation where, yeah, he was beat out and didn't win the starting job. But when he got the opportunity, he played better than the person who beat him out. And it very much reminds me of Uchenna Nwasu with the Chargers. I don't say San Diego, but I guess they're LA now. Because when Nwasu had a hard time getting on the field, and then somebody got hurt and he got to get out on the field and he looked really good, and Seattle, gave him that deal and he exploded here in Seattle. And Dodson looks primed to kind of do something very similar.
Yes, I agree with everything you just said, but he's also primed not to rise up to the level of expectations that we might be having for him, and that we're, essentially penciling him in as a starter. I've heard a lot of nice things about Tyrese Knight. I've heard those directly from Lofa Tatupu, not personal conversation, but Loaf has put these things out publicly on his podcast and being a guest on ESPN Radio. And he's loves this kid, like raves about him in this role, and thinks he can have an effect on game day from day one. And we're not hearing a lot about him yet. Like he didn't really kind of show up in minicamp as far as taking a lot of reps. And of course, you really can't touch anybody. He did what he needed to do. We're going to find out where he's at. Mike McDonald believed in him. I thought he was overdrafted personally based on his skill set and what he did in college, where he came from and so forth. But
in his college tape, he struggled in coverage, which is why I was not particularly excited about the pick. I mean, he is a Pete Carroll type player, guy who comes downhill and makes a lot of tackles, but doesn't move backwards and laterally and cover well. So, he's got the physical attributes to do those things. His tape, it's not pretty when asked to cover. So he's very much.
And I did hear similar things with Tyrell Dodson. I mean, you've mentioned the fact that he can cover like crazy and so forth. And I've recently read some things that point in a slightly different direction, and I just kind of want to see it.
Yeah, I want to see it. I read the same thing that you did. Let's talk about the
scheme. So let's talk about the scheme and how does it even matter?
No,
because he's going to be replaced on certain downs, right?
Because what's going to happen is, assuming the three of them are healthy, all three linebackers, Baker's going to play nearly 100% of the snaps as the guy in the middle. And you're going to have, when you're in your base defense, you're going to have one of the other guys in there with them. But when you go to the nickel, you're pulling that second middle linebacker out, right? The second inside linebacker comes off the field. And so you're left with just Baker in the middle, and the other guys are on the sidelines. And I think that you look at what they did in Baltimore last year, what McDonald did, where they were in the nickel 70% of the time. And you look at Seattle's question marks at inside linebacker and
the personnel that we do have, which is really good,
and a really deep room at cornerback. And you go, well, why wouldn't you be in the nickel all the time. And if you need, more tackling instead of less coverage, you can go with a heavy nickel and bring it, because you got 3 safeties on this team. And you can bring in a guy like Kayvon Wallace to come in and be that extra, the extra man in the box rather than an inside linebacker. So it's not going to matter that much, because you are only going to see 2 inside linebackers in there together, probably about, 29, 30% of the time. All of that works as long as Baker's healthy.
Yes.
If Baker's not healthy, then any deficiencies in coverage by your inside linebacker are going to show up. So,
yeah. So that's the expectation. So that was kind of my question leading into this: is, are we overemphasizing this position and our concerns? Even though it's the largest question mark on the defense, it's also the least talented group overall on the defense. And we're all concerned because, Bobby's not here anymore. Brooks isn't here. These are all new guys. We've never really seen him play. How is it all going to work? How's it all going to fit together? I think at this point, you just have to go back to the coaching. You have to just say, listen, this is Mike Macdonald's defense, A, B. This is his specialty spot on the defense, and he kind of knows what he's doing. And we need to just kind of trust, even though we haven't seen anything yet. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm just like, I'm going to focus on all the other good things, and I'm going to leave this largest question mark to the coaches and trust that they're going to figure it out.
Yeah. And there's that, but then there's also the fact that you got to look at, we know this defense is in transition as they adapt to a completely new scheme. And both these guys are on 1-year deals. They're on 1-year deals for a reason, right? They're on prove-it deals. They either come in and perform, or they don't, and they're gone next year and they move on. And we see a lot more of Tyrese Knight than we expect, because if Baker and Dotson don't live up to expectations, there's no reason to play them. Get Knight in there and to gain experience and improve and all of that. And because those guys are going to be gone at the end of the year. So, that's really what it comes down to me, is like, they know that this group is a weakness. But they basically kicked that can down the road another year, and they got in guys that they think can hold it down while they, churn the rest of the roster, and they'll deal with it next offseason.
So let's turn the attention to one of the funnest groups for me, which is the defensive linemen. I've kind of lumped them all into a category: nose tackles, 3 techs, etc. Mm-hmm. We drafted Byron Murphy at 16 overall in this draft. Kind of fell to them the way the draft fell. 14 out of the 15 players drafted in front of them were offensive players, which really helped push him down. And then the kid Latu from UCLA was the first defensive player taken, and Byron Murphy was sitting there. So It really worked out well for Seattle. In addition, Leonard Williams signed a big free agent contract to remain with the Seahawks after spending the last 10 games with Seattle last year. Jerron Reed's back. Draymond Jones, Jonathan Hankins signed a deal to come over and follow his coach from Dallas. Cameron Young is in his second season, anxious to kind of see where he's at. Mike Morris didn't get a chance last year because of an injury, was out all year on IR. He's going to get a chance to compete this year. Matthew Gotel, big 350-pound nose tackle, comes back after spending most of the time on the practice squad last year. And then Miles Adams comes back. And I say that almost as an afterthought because Miles Adams had a lot of playing time last year and was one of our weakest links. And looking at this lineup, it's possible that he doesn't even make the roster this year. So it's a nice little upgraded unit, and I'm pretty excited to see, because it really, I think, in Mike Macdonald's scheme, it all starts up here. The whole defense is predicated on getting it done up front and building backwards from there.
Yeah, it really is. And you look at what they did in Baltimore with guys like Budake and company up front. You've got to be able to be disruptive. And that's what he wants, is he wants disruptive players up front. Whereas in the Clint Hurt version of a 3-4 defense, they wanted guys up front that were going to eat space and eat blocks and stack offensive linemen rather than get upfield and get into the backfield and be disruptive. And it was weird. So what they're asking guys to is very different, with the exception of nose tackle, where in nose tackle, they still want the guy that can just hold the middle. And that's why the Jonathan Hankins signing was such a big deal, even though he's on the back end of his career. But hopefully between him, Gotel, and an improving Cameron Young, they're going to get some of that that nose tackle girth that this defense has been missing. And
we're talking about a 2-down player. We're not talking, necessarily a 3-down guy, although Jonathan Hankins could stay in there occasionally, but
you wouldn't want him to.
No, not unless you just don't have time to rotate.
Yeah. So on in obvious passing situations, on 3rd down, 2-minute drills, or against really pass happy teams, that nose tackle is not going to play much. But you're still going to, you still need it, especially on like goal line situations, 3rd and short, 1st downs, teams like to run the ball. You need that guy in the middle that can just anchor that defense and take up a ton of space. And they haven't had it. And now they do. Now they've got 3 guys that are going to be trying to fill that role. And so that's nice to have. But the rest of the group, it's not, take up space. It's not funnel running backs to Bobby Wagner. It's get upfield, be disruptive, change the play.
Yes.
And
get to the quarterback, right?
Get to the quarterback. Get to the running
get Seattle off the field on 3rd down.
Yep. Get into the backfield and be disruptive, which is not what Clint Hurt was asking any of the guys to do. He was asking them to, stay at the line of scrimmage, eat up a bunch of blocks, and funnel everything to Bobby Wagner.
And they didn't like that. None of them liked.
No,
that
it's
way
a waste
playing.
it was a waste of a lot of talent. Dre Jones is not that guy. He's a get upfield and be disruptive guy. Look what he did in Denver. Leonard Williams is not that guy.
He started out in the league as that guy, but he's developed over the years to have much more effect on the passing game.
Yeah, he's got the physical talents to be really disruptive, and so he's just kind of picked that up and learned how to do it. And those guys, and then now you had Byron Murphy, who's like
this kid could be a difference maker. Like this kid could be, all pro level. I'm not going to put too much on him first year. I want to see him play, obviously, but every indication is that he's a special talent. And in this defense, under this regime, you just feel like he's going to be optimized even early in his career, and to the point where he's, irreplaceable, in just short order for sure.
Yeah.
I'm excited about this group because you look at the first 3 guys I listed: Byron Murphy, Leonard Williams, Jerron Reed, Draymond Jones, Hankins. That matches up pretty well to almost any defensive line in the NFL, really, just as far as on paper talent. Mm-hmm. And now we get to see what they do inside this scheme. It's like we've seen some of these players before, but their hands were tied behind their back. Now let's see what they look like when they're optimized.
Yeah. And that's really kind of what we're looking at is, you're going to get so much more. And I love the Murphy pick in the draft. Like, goddamn, this kid, you watch his tape. He is freaking unblockable in college. Like they put 2 guys on him and it wouldn't matter. He'll split the double team, and get up after the quarterback, or get into the backfield and make the running back have to stop their feet in order to not get tackled in the backfield. And then, his teammates rally to him, and he was just dominant. And the Seahawks haven't had a dominant interior guy like that in a really long time. So it's just exciting that they're going to have a guy that can just take over games.
So I don't expect too much out of in training camp watching this group. I think that they're going to be vanilla-ish and really kind of hold back on disguises and all that kind of stuff. I think you're going to see some straight man against man play and so forth. Not a lot of stunts. But as the season unwinds, I expect this group to really kind of come into its own and kind of be one of the premier groups in our entire defense. Then to that group, going hand in hand, are the edge rushers. And you add Nuwasu, Boyamafe, Derek Hall, Darrell Taylor. Those guys are going to be the top four. We got a few guys behind them. But you expect, based on the idea that we've got a new aggressiveness with our defensive linemen, they're really going to open up opportunities for the edge rushers to really take over games potentially.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, you've got talent at those edge players. You've got guys that can get up the field and get after the quarterback. One of the things that they struggled with in the old scheme was simply that they would get upfield and the quarterback would just step up into the pocket and get away from them. Well, now if you've got pressure coming up the middle, they can't step up. Now you're going to see those guys get home more often.
That's exactly right, Keith.
And you've already got a team that had a ton of sacks because of those outside guys. And now you help them and you make their life easier. You make their job, simpler, and they're just going to get home more often, and you're just going to see like big sack totals, I think, this year.
So last year we had 47 sacks. That ranked 12th in the NFL. And they weren't too far off. I think the high was 56 or 60, something like that. Somebody had an outlandish season defense, but 47 is not bad, but a lot of them seemed kind of empty. And they had a hard time getting to the quarterback on critical third down conversions. Like we were just almost dead last in the NFL in third down conversions against us. And so I expect that to change radically this year.
Yeah, the team that had 60 was Baltimore.
Without really any big name guys.
Yeah. Yeah. They also led the league in turnovers, like takeaways, and turnover differential,
which are huge.
Yeah.
And if the offense, now this is where these things work in conjunction. If the offense is great at converting third down, staying on the field, and you have a defense that's good at stopping such things, that's where you get very interesting as a team that's ready to compete for the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, third down conversion rate. I can't believe Cleveland and Denver were the top two teams that in terms of defensive, but Baltimore was sixth. Teams only converted 36.4% of third downs.
And how much Baltimore against us? Like 48? Something like that.
46.3. Third from the bottom. Arizona and the Eagles were the only teams worse.
That's amazing.
So, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about, we touched briefly on corners, but let's just talk about the defensive backs as a whole, safety and corners on this team. Very, very talented. We're not familiar with Rashawn Jenkins in this defense, but I think he's going to fit right in. He's going to be kind of one of the leaders on this team. Julian Love really kind of came into his own. He had 4 interceptions last year. I'm anxious to see how he is used in this scheme. Probably somewhat similar. He was kind of a jack of all trades safety last year. Kayvon Wallace is more of a physical guy. Ty Akota and Jarek Reed and Jonathan Sutherland are the other options there at safety. It'd be interesting to find out how they value, what they value out of their safety group. Jarek Reed, and he may not even be ready, and likely won't be ready in training camp. But
which is unfortunate because he's a guy that I think this coaching staff would like his skill set, because
I think they would like his skill set more than Kobe Bryant, for example.
Oh yeah,
which I failed to mention Kobe Bryant.
Because Kobe Bryant can play, the deep safety or in the slot, but he doesn't tackle worth a damn. And even in coverage as the deep safety, he made a lot of mistakes last year. But he doesn't play up in the box, and he's not physical, and there's lots of things there. Whereas, Jarek Reed is a jack of all trades. He's Julian Love light, right? He can do anything. He can do all the things. Maybe not, but just not as good as Julian Love at this point in his career. But he can do all the things, which makes him very multiple. And when he's on the field, you don't, just because he's, there on the field doesn't mean you know exactly what he's going to be doing, which is what this defense wants out of its secondary. And you want guys like Julian Love that can do everything. You can be a jack of all trades, that you can rotate them forward, backwards. You can have them in the deep third or in the box, and you can rotate guys around just to make things confusing. They need guys that are going to be multiple.
So speaking of multiple and maybe not being multiple, Jonathan Sutherland seems like a guy that's kind of an in-the-box safety, somebody that would back up Kayvon Wallace or have an opportunity to compete against Kayvon Wallace for a roster spot. Where do you think that competition kind of plays out?
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Jonathan Sutherland looked really nice last year in camp and in preseason, and unfortunately got hurt. And we never really got a chance to see him get an opportunity. And I would have loved to see him get an opportunity, because on top of being an in-the-box, very physical guy, he's got great speed. And so he's just got a lot of physical tools that you'd like to see. But now we got a new coaching staff. And so they're evaluating him from the very beginning, from square one. And we'll see what he does this training camp, and if he can adapt to the different things that a new coaching staff and a new scheme are asking him to do. I like to think that he has the ability to do the things. Yeah, he can be in the box because he's very physical and stuff, but he's got the speed. If he has the coverage instincts, he could be more multiple than he showed last year. And therefore, I don't know if he can play in the slot though. The lateral movement, agility stuff's not really there, but he can play in the back and in the front. Then there's a spot for him, especially because he can freaking play special teams with that speed and tackling ability. And so there's a chance. But Kayvon Wallace is kind of the same guy with more experience and a better track record. So we'll see how that works for him. Both of those guys could make this roster. I mean, it's because you want guys that can play special teams. Yeah. But if that happens, then that's because, Jarek Reed is on the PUP list or on IR, and Kobe Bryant's not on the roster. So it comes down to, kind of how everything else falls.
Yes. Well, let's talk about cornerbacks, because this is my favorite group. Maybe my second favorite group. I really like those defensive linemen, but the cornerback room arguably is the most talented group on this roster, and I would say underrated as far as the NFL is concerned overall. But I think that changes after this season. Yeah. Devin Witherspoon comes back for his second season. Who wouldn't be excited to see him play in this scheme? I think he's going to be used all over the place. Tariq Woolen, can he rebound and come back and have a really good, strong season? Mike Jackson,
can we talk about Witherspoon for a second? Because I read some stuff. I read some stuff that were some comments by teammates about him. And he is in there that, like, they were saying that during the practices, he was the most vocal guy. He was the guy that everyone could hear. Whether it was getting after guys who, were being a little lackadaisical, or pumping guys up, and just kind of being that heartbeat of the defense, the way like Cam Chancellor used to be, on top of being, incredibly good and everything. And so Leonard Williams said when he got traded and came over, the first couple practices, he was like, who the hell is this kid? Some rookie, and he's out here yelling and
he's a corner.
And yeah, he's not even like a linebacker, or he's not a big guy.
He's a physical guy though.
But he's physical. He gets up and he plays a lot of tackles well and plays and is just kind of there. And he was like, what the hell's up with this kid? And over time he was like, oh, that's what's up with this kid. This kid is who he is. Like this, he is going to be a leader on this defense, and no one's going to tell him no. And that's a good thing. And I just thought that was kind of cool that Leonard Williams, who's been in the league a long time, came over and he's like, okay, rookies aren't like this. And then they're like, but he should be, because that's,
now think about the void that the team had before Devin Witherspoon, mm-hmm. and after like Earl Thomas and those kind of guys. There was like a 4 or 5 year period there where we really didn't have a vocal leader on this defense. Even though Bobby Wagner was there, he just wasn't that kind of a player. Kind of a soft
he's a different guy. Kind of leader. He's a different kind of leader. They've really missed that,
the alpha dog,
since Cam Chancellor.
Yeah. They thought Jamal Adams would come over, and of course, Jamal probably did that first year, but after that he really couldn't back it up, so he kind of got quiet. Mm-hmm. He got injured, he was off the field, he wasn't able to affect anybody. And so Devin Witherspoon there now is that guy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you look at is that, they had all those like alpha dogs, with Sherman and Chancellor and Earl Thomas, and like that was kind of the way that defense was constructed. But when they started to run into problems where those guys were, having conflict with coaches and that kind of stuff, they went the other direction. And you look at like Lano Hill and Tedrick Thompson and Shaq Griffin. They were all very quiet guys, very almost people pleasers in terms of like in the locker room and that kind of stuff. And the defense lost an edge.
People pleasers. Wow. That's so true too.
And the defense totally lost that edge, that like swagger. I really think Jamal Adams was an attempt, and the reason why they were willing to give up what they gave up for him was to get that leadership, that voice, that that they really needed back into the defensive huddle. Hoping that he's an elite player in the box. At least he was when they traded for him, even though he wasn't good in coverage. He was still a really good player and a very much needed presence. And it just never worked out for him because he couldn't stay healthy. And so they've got to do things differently. And I think Witherspoon is that guy. You look up front, and Byron Murphy has that kind of swagger to him. So did Leonard Williams. You look at Jenkins, the new free safety that's there, has that like leadership aura to him where people listen. He's not as demonstrative. He's more soft spoken, but a true leader. He's very much a Bobby Wagner style. And so you kind of look there like, okay, we need to go get back to a little bit of having guys that play with a little bit of edge on defense.
Swagger. The defense needs that identity.
They do. And they just haven't had it really since.
And Mike McDonald demands it. Like that's his thing, And so I'm really excited about this group, Keith. I mean, we can mention, Mike Jackson, Trey Brown. Trey Brown's taking starting reps all off season, in mini camps and so forth. I think he's kind of a guy that, you kind of forget about these guys a little bit, Trey Brown and Mike Jackson, just because I think they could start on half the league, teams, really.
I mean, and then Mike Jackson's a little more limited in that, he's got to be in a zone coverage scheme. He's not going to be he's not going to play well in a scheme that plays a lot of man coverage. But he's long. He's very physical.
I think that he
tackles
could play in spots and press man. He's very physical, right? He's tall, long, but he doesn't have that makeup speed.
That's the problem. Yep.
Yeah.
And so
if he can knock somebody off their route and then somebody else can pick him up on the back end, that's,
Yeah. And so, but in a zone type of situation where he can, use all those traits and not have to worry about that, makeup speed issue, he excels. And we saw that a couple of years ago. Last year he kind of lost his job to Devin Witherspoon, but you know what? Find me more than 5 corners in this league that wouldn't have lost their job to Devin Witherspoon. You're not going to,
right.
He was that good. And so, he's kind of a forgotten man, but quality player. And then people forget about Trey Brown. Like when he was brought in as a rookie, like once he got on the field, we were like, oh, this kid can flat out play. Like he can cover, he's physical. And then he got hurt and that was unfortunate. But even last year, he got a chance to come back and showed a lot of good things. And so, and he's what, the 5th corner on this team?
4th. Well, maybe. Well, he's probably the 3rd. I think he's above Mike Jackson. So I think it's
so.
Witherspoon, Woolen, Brown, probably.
Okay.
And Trey Brown's got multiple positions that he can play.
He can play, in the slot, which Mike Jackson can't. But then you've also got guys like the 2 rookies that you have to count into the equation here because they were drafted for a reason. And while I think, was it DJ Hayden? It is a long shot for the roster. Pritchard, I think.
DJ James.
James, that's right. Pritchard has a chance to. I think he makes this roster and has a role. It's mostly on special teams early, but if someone gets hurt, he's going to be an outside corner and have a chance to compete. And so,
he's undersized at Pritchett is undersized at like 6 foot or 5'11", 185, but James is as well. They're both similar in stature, but they play different kind of styles.
They do. We say 5'11", undersized. That's kind of a before Richard Sherman. Richard Sherman, that was what you were looking for. You were looking for guys that were 5'11". You weren't looking for anyone that was like 6'1" or 6'4" like Sherman. But it's amazing how the Legion of Boom transformed the position, and now everyone's like, "Oh, 5'11's short." No,
right.
that's that was ideal before the Legion of Boom. So
we had Devin Witherspoon on this roster. We had Woolen. We had Mike Jackson. We had Trey Brown. We had Kobe Bryant. We had Artie Burns. And then we drafted 2 guys. Why did we draft 2 guys, Keith?
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't have a problem with one, but both of them and both out of the same program, and wasn't even that great of a.
Well, I mean, here's the deal: Mike Jackson, Trey Brown, and Artie Burns are all on essentially 1-year deals.
True.
Maybe that's why they're just looking ahead a little bit. That's just the way.
That's why I don't think all 3 of those guys make the roster.
I know.
And so they're either traded.
Nehemiah Pritchett takes Kobe Bryant's spot. I really do. Kobe Bryant has just really struggled since the day he came into the NFL, and I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe somebody can get a hold of him. My issue is Carl Scott, his defensive backs coach, is back this year coaching the same player, and he hasn't been able to figure him out. And so I'm not sure that he's just a fit in the NFL game.
Well, and DJ James is the same guy. They're guys that were good in college because it's a different game, and you have, if you're technical enough, you can do really well. But in the NFL, you have to have the technique and the physical attributes. And Kobe Bryant doesn't have the physical attributes. He's just not the athlete. And it shows up on game day. And DJ James is
the game really
guy.
has never slowed down for Bryant. Like it's never
Guys
really been. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause he just doesn't have the athleticism, the, just the physical traits to be really good in this league. And that's my concern with DJ James. There were analysts out there that had him as a 3rd round talent, and you look at his tape and you can see it, but then you look at his physical traits and you're like, oh, well, that's why he fell, and he probably should have fallen further. Because
he runs in the 4.3s. He's got the agility and so forth. He just lacks the stature and
his stature and the length, and he doesn't really have the agility or the explosiveness. He's got some straight line speed. But Pritchard at least he's got more speed. He's got better agility numbers, and he's taller and longer. So
if you say Pritchard one more time, I'm going to wallop you.
What is it?
Pritchett.
Pritchett. I'm just going to say Pritchard now, just because I know it bothers you. Pritchett. I have been saying that wrong.
I have one more guy in mind on YouTube. One of our listeners that's probably going to be bothered just as much, if not more than me. He will probably let you know.
Because I've been saying it wrong since they drafted him.
So okay, so here we are. We're coming to the end of this show. Training camp preview. We really haven't seen anything yet. Everything we've been talking about is just an idea, is a speculation, is kind of a wish, what we wish for.
Well, that's part of it, is that one of the things that Mike McDonald is known for is adapting what he does to the talent. So he's got basic ideas of what he wants to do. But if what he wants to do requires a middle linebacker this team doesn't have, he's going to adapt what they do.
Or they're going to go get one.
As
they did with Roquan Smith.
Yeah. And so you have, they will adapt what they do to the talent. And so we are speculating based on what they did in Baltimore, because that's the scheme he wants to run. But Seattle has different talent. They've got strength in different places. They've got better corners than they did in Baltimore. They don't have Kyle Hamilton at safety. They don't have a Roquan Smith at middle linebacker.
Witherspoon.
Yeah. So they've got talent in different places. And so what they're going to do is going to be adapted to the talent that Seattle has. And so there is a lot of speculation in what we say, because we don't know exactly what they're going to do. This was easier when Pete Carroll was here, because we knew exactly what Pete Carroll was going to do on every play, because it was always the same. And so we could make these evaluations a lot clearer. I want to see it on the field. I'm excited to see this new scheme and how it works and all the moving parts and everything.
So on the offensive side, I asked you, how you thought this would play out, during the season, how they would show up. Are they going to be good? What are they going to be bad at? When are they going to kind of all figure it out? Do the same on the defense. Where are we at with this defense?
Defense always comes along faster than the offense. This particular defense, there's so much communication that has to happen, and so much of that stuff. It's going to come along slower than I think we're used to, because usually a new defense comes along and it's installed faster. But this one's going to come along a little slower. But the athletes are there, the bodies are there. I think it's going to start to steamroll once they start to have a little success. And you're going to see when they get into 7-on-7s, the offense is probably going to look really good, because you've got, DK Metcalf and company. But when you're doing 11-on-11s and now you've got a pass rush, you're going to see the defense start to take over. And I'd be willing to bet that the defense is going to win a lot of days at training camp.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's going to be fun. It's going to be super fun to watch these guys. and kind of grow with them. Like my expectations, it's going to be really interesting to get to our prediction show, because now we've talked and talked and talked. Now we're going to see it a little bit. And how optimistic are we going to be this year versus how realistic are we going to be? And how that plays out, and how we view the season, and what the schedule brings, and which is actually kind of favorable, I think, for Seattle. And so it should be fun. I'm glad we're talking about things we're seeing on the field from this day forward. Rookies come in to camp. We're going to be able to start talking about that. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun change for us. Anything else before we get out of here?
Have fun next week in the heat while I'm sitting on the beach.
Okay. I'll try my best. That involves me, sitting in my house in air conditioning, essentially, and looking outside.
And enjoying the weather when you don't have to be in it, because you're in.
The cool thing is you can get up at 5:30, 6:30 in the morning, and you can be cool enough to kind of do what you need to do outside for the first couple hours of the day. And then it is hibernation time. And we played pickleball last night after dinner, and we didn't do it outside. There's an indoor pickleball facility here that we reserved and played indoors. So that's kind of what you have to do.
What I remember about living down there is that it can be blistering hot during the day at 114 and still get down to 72 degrees overnight. And there can just be these huge shifts where I was looking at the weather for the beach, and it's going to be a high of 68 and a low of 62.
Yeah. Well, here it's a high of, like today is a high of 110, and the low will be 92. 92 for a low. Like, that's stupid. Like, you wake up in the morning and it's already hot. It's, sometimes it's muggy if it rained a little bit or whatever. It's just, summers here are just not my ideal thing. Now, I was in the Northwest recently where you're at visiting. We did a show together. That was amazing because the highs were 100 every day that I was there, but the lows were still getting into the, mid to low 60s. I was like, wow, I forget what it's like to live like that. I haven't had a low of 60 since February. So that's crazy. Okay.
Yeah, we've had some interesting weather up here in the Northwest. Like, we've been, I think we've had one day that hasn't been in the 90s or 100s in the last 2 weeks, which is crazy. So
it's a good place to be in the summer. I really like the Northwest. I really do. And then the winter here, obviously, is just crazy nice. So, okay. Next show, we'll be talking about training camp stuff, what we're seeing, and it's going to be great.
It'll be fun.
So
looking forward
let's
to it.
get out of here. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast, and you can find it on your favorite podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., and our own YouTube channel. And hit that subscribe button and share it. That would be great. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.